The neon lights of Station Omega-7 flickered like dying stars, casting long purple shadows across the crowded cantina. The air was thick with alien smoke and the bitter smell of exotic liquors. Traders from a dozen different worlds argued over cargo prices while smugglers whispered deals in dark corners. In the furthest booth, hidden behind a wall of empty bottles, sat Krextal. His massive frame barely fit in the human-sized furniture. Blue scales covered his body like ancient armor, each one bearing the marks of battle. Plasma burns had left twisted silver scars across his chest and arms. 4 powerful limbs moved, with the slow, careful precision of someone who had learned that sudden movements could mean death. His yellow eyes, each the size of a human fist, swept the cantina constantly. Old habits died hard. Even 20 years after the war, Krextal still checked every entrance, counted every weapon, measured every threat. The memories never faded. A young Vorthak journalist pushed through the crowd, his green tentacles trembling with nervous energy. He clutched a recording device in one hand and a bottle of expensive Rigelian whiskey in the other. Peace offerings were always wise when approaching war veterans. "Excuse me," the journalist's voice cracked slightly. "Are you Krextal, former commander of the Calarian 4th Fleet?" Krextal's massive head turned slowly, those golden eyes fixed on the young alien like targeting computers locking onto prey. For a moment, the journalist wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Depends who's asking. Krextal's voice rumbled like distant thunder. Each word carried the weight of authority, of someone used to being obeyed without question. "I'm Zilnex from the Galactic Chronicle. I'm writing about the human war for the anniversary edition. The Coalition records are all classified, and most veterans won't talk. I was hoping you might sit." The command cut through the cantina noise like a plasma blade. Several nearby conversations stopped as other patrons glanced over nervously. "But order something strong first. Trust me, you'll need it." Zilnex slid into the booth, his tentacles curling with anxiety. He signaled the bartender for 2 glasses of the strongest stuff they had. The drinks arrived quickly, glowing blue liquid that seemed to move on its own. "Most veterans won't talk because we're ashamed," Krextal said, downing half his drink in one gulp. 27 species. The Calarian Empire, the Zephyrian Collective, the Hive Worlds, the Crystal Matrices, the greatest military alliance in galactic history. Fleets that had conquered 1,000 worlds, weapons that could crack planets, soldiers bred for war. He paused, staring into his glass. All of us brought to our knees by hairless apes who couldn't even leave their own solar system. Zilnex activated his recorder with trembling fingers. "The official reports say it was a brief conflict. 6 months. Minimal casualties on both sides. Peaceful resolution." Krextal's mandibles clicked, the Calarian equivalent of bitter laughter. "Official reports, written by politicians who never saw a human kill squad in action, never watched a 12-year-old human child strap explosives to herself and walk into a coalition command post with a smile." The journalist's tentacles went pale. "Surely you're exaggerating." "Am I?" Krextal's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile on a creature capable of such expressions. It started routine enough. Our intelligence networks had been watching Earth for decades. Primitive world, they said, split into hundreds of squabbling nations, still used chemical rockets for space travel. Their most advanced weapons were basic kinetic projectiles. He took another sip of his drink. The Coalition War Council saw them as easy prey, a young species to be absorbed into our empire, their resources stripped, their people enslaved or eliminated. Standard procedure. We'd done it to civilizations far more advanced than humanity. What was the initial strategy? Simple intimidation. Hit them hard and fast, break their will to resist. We chose their first interstellar colony, Kepler 442b, farming world mostly. 300,000 settlers trying to build a new life among the stars. Krextal's voice grew quieter, more distant. Admiral Thexmore ordered a full orbital bombardment. Plasma cannons, antimatter torpedoes, molecular disruptors. We turned their entire colony into glass and ash in under an hour. Men, women, children, elderly, didn't matter. We wanted Earth to see what happened to those who defied the Coalition. Standard intimidation protocol, Zilnex nodded. familiar with such tactics from his historical research. Exactly. Make them fear us. Show them resistance was futile. Then, offer terms. Surrender now, accept vassalage, and we'll let their species survive as servants. Krextal's yellow eyes blazed with remembered confusion. Every species we'd encountered before chose survival. Better to live as slaves than die as free beings. But not the humans. Not the humans. Krextal shook his massive head. 6 Earth. Hours. That's how long it took for something impossible to happen. Every human nation, and they had over 200 of them, declared war on us simultaneously. Not just their governments, their civilians, their corporations, their criminal organizations, their religious groups, their children. The veteran's voice carried a note of something between admiration and terror. We had awakened something ancient and terrible, something we didn't understand until it was far too late. The humans had a saying, Krextal continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The cantina seemed to lean in, even the rowdy traders going quiet as if sensing the weight of his words. Attack one, face all. We learned this the hard way at the Battle of Europa Station. The journalist recorder hummed softly between them, capturing every word of the veteran's haunted recollection. I was commander of the heavy cruiser Vex Tar back then. Beautiful ship she was. 2 kilometers of pure destruction, armed with enough firepower to level a city. My crew numbered 8,000 of the Coalition's finest warriors. Krextal's scarred fingers traced the rim of his empty glass. Our fleet numbered 300 ships, dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, carriers packed with fighter squadrons. Enough firepower to conquer most star systems without breaking a sweat. He paused, ordering another drink with a gesture. The humans? They had maybe 50 vessels defending Europa Station, pathetic little things cobbled together from mining ships, cargo haulers, and civilian transports. Some didn't even have proper weapons, just industrial equipment hastily converted for war. We laughed when we saw them through our sensors. So it must have seemed like an easy victory, Zilnex commented, his tentacles writhing with nervous energy. That's what we thought. Admiral Korthek was so confident he didn't even bother with full battle formations. Just a straight charge. Overwhelming. Force quick victory. Clean up the debris and move on to Earth itself. Krextal's mandibles clicked bitterly. Their leader was a human named Hyun Su, captain of something they called a destroyer, barely a quarter the size of our smallest frigate. When we opened communications and demanded immediate surrender, he transmitted back a single word. What did he say? No. Krextal's yellow eyes blazed with remembered shock. Not, we need time to consider, or what are your terms, just no. Like we were asking him to pass the salt at dinner. The audacity of it stunned our entire command staff into silence. The veteran took a long drink before continuing. That should have been our first warning. Any civilized species would have at least tried to negotiate, but humans, they just said no and prepared to die fighting. What happened when the battle began? Hell. Pure, unimaginable hell. Krextal's voice carried the weight of nightmare. Memories. Those primitive humans had turned their cargo containers into missile launchers packed with nuclear warheads. Their mining ships, designed to crack asteroids, carried devices that could punch holes straight through our armor plating. He gestured with one of his forearms, demonstrating the chaos. Captain Hyun Su's destroyer came at us first, engines burning so bright they looked like miniature stars. Our gunners couldn't get a proper lock. The human ship was moving in patterns. That made no tactical sense. Spinning, diving, weaving through our formation, like it was dancing instead of fighting. Surely your superior numbers gave you an advantage. Numbers mean nothing when your enemy doesn't follow the rules of war. A human pilot named Min Ho was flying a damaged fighter, half his ship blown away, life support failing, weapons systems dead. Any rational being would have ejected or retreated. Krextal's scarred face twisted with dark memory. Instead, he accelerated his crippled fighter directly toward our flagship's bridge. The journalist's recording device nearly slipped from his trembling grasp. Admiral Zorketh had just enough time to realize what was happening before impact. The explosion took out the entire command section, the admiral, half the senior staff, and our primary communications array. One human, One tiny fighter, and our entire fleet coordination collapsed in seconds. That's when the real chaos started? Oh, that was just the beginning. Krextal's laugh was hollow and bitter. While we were scrambling to reorganize, a human strike team led by a female named Unji somehow infiltrated our supply ship, Mordex. We still don't know how they got past our security screens. He paused, studying his reflection in the blue liquid. Here's the thing that still haunts me. They didn't try to capture the ship, didn't attempt to steal our supplies or take prisoners for intelligence. They went straight to the reactor core with enough explosive charges to crack a moon. They destroyed your supplies, 13,000 tons of military equipment, ammunition, spare parts, and medical supplies, gone in a flash of superheated plasma. But Yunji and her team, they escaped in the confusion, somehow slipped away in maintenance pods while our damage control teams were fighting the fires. Krextal's claws scraped against his cup, leaving deep scratches in the metal. That was our first taste of human warfare. They didn't fight to capture territory or resources. They fought to hurt us, to make us bleed, to show us that every victory would cost more than we could afford to pay. How did they learn to use your technology so quickly? That was the most terrifying part. While we were still trying to understand what had happened, human salvage teams were already swarming through the wreckage. They cut apart our destroyed ships with precision tools, cataloging every component, every weapon system, every piece of advanced technology they could find. The veteran's voice dropped to barely audible levels. Within 3 Earth months, they were using our own weapons against us, but not just using them, improving them, making them deadlier, more efficient, more terrifying than we ever imagined possible. They took our plasma cannons and somehow doubled their range. Our shield generators became power sources for weapons we'd never seen before. How is that possible? Because humans don't just adapt to survive, they adapt to win. Every setback makes them stronger. Every loss teaches them something new. We thought we were fighting a primitive species. Instead, we had awakened something that would reshape the entire galaxy. The real nightmare began at the Proxima defense grid, Krextal continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The massive alien's 4 arms trembled slightly as he reached for another drink. That's where I first understood what we were truly fighting. The cantina had grown eerily quiet around them. Even the loudest traders and smugglers found themselves unconsciously leaning in to catch every word from the scarred veteran. Something in his tone warned that this story would be different, darker than anything they'd heard before. The Coalition High Command had decided to end the war once and for all. No more half measures, no more underestimating the humans. They committed everything we had, 47 battle fleets from across the galaxy, Calarian dreadnoughts, Zephyrian, war swarms, crystalline siege breakers, hive bioships that could eat through hull plating. Krextal's yellow eyes grew distant, seeing ghost images of that terrible day. The greatest armada ever assembled in galactic history. Over 15,000 warships, each one capable of reducing a planet to rubble. Troop transports carrying 1 million coalition soldiers. Support vessels stretching from here to the next star system. When our sensors finished counting, the fleet covered 3 cubic light-hours of space. He paused, letting the magnitude sink in. The humans? They had one partially constructed space station orbiting Proxima Centauri, and maybe 200 ships to defend it. Most were converted civilian vessels, cargo haulers with armor welded on, passenger liners bristling with improvised weapons. Their mighty defense grid was still under construction, half-finished and held together with emergency welds. Military doctrine said it should have been a massacre, Zilnex whispered, his tentacles curled tight with anticipation. Krextal's mandibles clicked, that bitter, hollow laugh again. Oh, it was a massacre, just not the kind we expected. The veteran's scarred hands gripped his cup so tightly the metal began to buckle. The humans had a commander named Jun Ho, former Earth military, decorated veteran of something they called the Resource Wars. When our advanced scouts transmitted surrender demands, he didn't even bother to respond. Just started issuing orders in that calm, matter-of-fact way humans have when they're about to do something insane. What kind of orders? He did something no civilized species would even consider. He turned the station's construction equipment into weapons of war. Those massive magnetic cranes designed to move 100-ton hull plates. Junho reprogrammed them to hurl chunks of asteroid at our approaching fleet. Each projectile hit with the force of a tactical nuclear weapon. Krextal's voice grew stronger as he warmed to the terrifying details. Industrial plasma cutters meant for welding became precision beam weapons that could slice through our armor like it was paper. Fabrication units designed to build station components started churning out improvised mines, explosive drones, even crude missiles built from construction materials. But surely your overwhelming numbers meant nothing when the humans turned their entire environment into a weapon. Mining robots became suicide bombers. Waste processing systems were converted into chemical weapon dispensers. Even the station's artificial gravity generators were weaponized. Junho used them to create gravity wells that crushed our fighter squadrons like insects. The journalist's recording device nearly slipped from his trembling grasp as Krextal continued. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the humans inside that station. When our assault troops finally breached the outer hull after hours of fighting, they expected to find broken defenders ready to surrender. Krextal's voice dropped to barely audible levels. Instead, they found humans who kept fighting even when the station was falling apart around them. Emergency bulkheads were blown open, atmosphere bleeding into space, radiation levels that would kill most species in minutes. But the humans just put on environmental suits and kept shooting. How is that possible? I watched through combat. Feeds as a human engineer named So Young held the main reactor room single-handed for 6 hours. 6 hours! She'd taken plasma burns across half her body, wounds that would have put any coalition soldier into shock. Her left arm was completely useless. Her face was a mask of dried blood, and her combat suit was more patched than original material. Krextal's scarred face twisted with something between admiration and horror. She could have evacuated to the inner sections, could have fallen back with the other defenders. Hell, she could have just abandoned her post and tried to escape. But she didn't. She stayed at that reactor control station, keeping their shields online, rerouting power to weapons systems, coordinating defensive fire patterns while coalition troops were literally shooting at her through the doorway. What happened to her? She died at her post, but not before uploading something into the station's main computer, a virus that triggered every self-destruct system simultaneously. Mining charges, reactor overloads, fuel cell explosions, even the emergency beacon became a bomb. The veteran's voice cracked with remembered shock. When our main assault force moved in for the final push, thinking victory was assured, the entire Proxima defense grid turned into the biggest explosion I've ever seen. 27 coalition capital ships, including 3 dreadnoughts and a fleet carrier, simply vanished in a flash of nuclear fire. 50,000 of our finest warriors gone in an instant. Krextal drained his cup in one gulp, his 4 hands shaking. That's when we finally understood what we were facing. We weren't fighting an army or even a government. We were fighting a species that would rather die than kneel, that could turn anything into a weapon, that saw defeat as just another kind of victory if it hurt us badly enough. The cantina remained silent for long moments after he finished speaking, the weight of his words settling over the assembled aliens like a shroud. The war changed after Proxima, Krextal said, his scarred claws trembling as he signaled for another bottle of the strongest liquor the cantina had. The blue liquid sloshed as he poured, some spilling onto the metal table. For the first time in galactic history, humans stopped playing defense and went on the attack. The journalist leaned forward, sensing they were approaching the darkest chapter of the veteran's tale. Around them, the cantina had grown so quiet that even the atmospheric recyclers seemed to hum more softly. Up until that point, we thought we understood warfare, civilized combat between honorable species. You attack military targets, avoid civilian casualties when possible, follow the ancient codes that have governed galactic conflict for millennia. Krextal's yellow eyes blazed with bitter memory. The humans threw all of that out the airlock. He took a long drink before continuing. Operation Stormbreaker, they called it. The name should have warned us. Led by Admiral Tae-min, a former cargo pilot who'd learned strategy by watching his friends die, and General Hee-jin, A woman who'd lost her entire family when we glassed their colony world. What made their offensive so different? Everything. They had spent months reverse engineering our technology, but they didn't just copy it. They improved it in ways that made our own scientists weep with envy. Their ships were smaller than ours, but twice as fast. Their weapons had less raw power but surgical precision that could hit weak points we didn't even know existed. Krextal's mandibles clicked nervously, a habit he'd developed during the war and never lost. But the real terror was their tactics. They broke every rule of civilized warfare, did things that no honorable species would consider. They attacked our supply lines first, not just the ships but the entire infrastructure that kept our war machine running. How do you attack infrastructure across multiple star systems? With humans like Dongwu. The veteran's voice dropped to barely above, a whisper. He was just a computer programmer before the war. Worked for some civilian tech company, wrote code for entertainment systems. But when his world was invaded, he became something else entirely. Krextal paused, staring into his drink as if seeing ghosts in the blue liquid. Dongwu led a strike team that infiltrated our main logistics hub at Kepler Station, 300 coalition species working together, the most secure facility in our empire, protected by energy shields that could stop a fleet and guarded by our finest soldiers. How did they get inside? They didn't break in. They walked in. Dongwu had created false identification codes so perfect that our own security systems welcomed them like visiting dignitaries. Once inside, he released a computer virus that turned our automated systems into weapons against us. The journalist's tentacles writhed with nervous energy as Krextal described the scope of the disaster. 30 billion credits worth of military. Equipment destroyed overnight. Ammunition depots exploded in chain reactions. Fuel storage tanks ruptured and ignited. Manufacturing robots went berserk and tore apart anything they could reach. And the worst part, our own computers were broadcasting the destruction across every communication channel, forcing us to watch our empire crumble in real time. Surely, your fleets could respond to such attacks. That was the humans' next target, our communication networks. They didn't just jam our signals or destroy our relay stations, they did something far more insidious. Krextal's scarred face twisted. With remembered horror, our colonies went dark one by one. Not destroyed, not captured, just silent. No distress calls, no final messages, nothing. He gestured with all four arms, painting a picture of growing panic. When we sent investigation fleets to find out what happened, they found ghost ships, our own vessels floating dead in space, their crews missing or worse. The humans had turned our ships into traps, filling them with booby traps and automated weapons that activated when rescue teams came aboard. What happened to the crews? Some were taken prisoner for intelligence gathering. Others were simply left on uninhabitable worlds with just enough supplies to survive until we found them, driving our commanders mad with desperate rescue missions that stretched our forces thin. Krextal's voice grew barely audible, forcing everyone in the cantina to strain to hear. But the worst was the Battle of Vega Prime. My new command, the heavy cruiser Torval, was part of a relief fleet trying to break the siege of one of our oldest colonies. We thought we knew what to expect, human ships using our stolen technology, maybe some new tactical innovations. But it was different. The humans had developed something that still gives me nightmares. They called it a quantum torpedo, designed by a scientist named Young Su, who'd been captured early in the war and somehow escaped coalition prison camps. The veteran's claws left deep scratches in the metal table as his grip tightened. Young Su and his team of former prisoners had spent their captivity studying everything about our ships: hull composition, armor thickness, shield frequencies, power distribution. They knew our vessels better than we did. Then they built a weapon specifically designed to counter every defense we had. What did this weapon do? It didn't just destroy matter, it unraveled it at the molecular level. When a quantum torpedo hit a ship, the vessel didn't explode or break apart. It simply ceased to exist atom by atom until nothing remained but empty space and the screams of our crews over the communication channels. Krextal's eyes grew distant, seeing ghost images that would haunt him forever. I watched the dreadnought Vexcalar take a direct hit, 15,000 crew members, a ship that had survived 100 battles across 50 worlds, veteran warriors who'd served with honor for decades. One moment they were there, calling for reinforcements. The next moment, there was just nothing, not even debris to mark where they'd been. The cantina remained frozen in horrified silence as the veterans' words painted pictures of unimaginable destruction. That's when we finally understood that we weren't fighting for conquest anymore. We were fighting for survival against a species that had made war into an art form. The war ended not with a battle, but with a revelation, Krextal said, his voice heavy with exhaustion that seemed to weigh down his massive frame. The veteran's forearms hung limply at his sides, scarred hands trembling slightly from memories that would never fade. The Coalition High Command finally understood what we were truly facing. The journalist leaned forward eagerly, sensing they were approaching the climax of this incredible tale. Around them, the cantina had become a theater of silence, every patron hanging on the old warrior's words. It happened during the siege of Kepler Station, humanity's last major stronghold in the Outer Rim. By that point, we had pushed them back to their final defensive positions. Earth itself was blockaded. Their colonies had fallen one by one, and their fleet was reduced to a handful of battered ships held together with spare parts and desperate hope. Krextal's yellow eyes grew distant, seeing the ghosts of that final battle. The Coalition had assembled everything we had left, what remained of 27 species military might, over 2 million soldiers, 5,000 warships, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. The humans were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, their weapons running low on ammunition, their ships leaking atmosphere and running on emergency power. He paused to order another drink, his scarred claws clicking against the bottle. High Command was confident this would be the end. One final push, crush their last resistance, and force Earth to surrender. We had them completely surrounded, cut off from all supplies, facing impossible odds. Any rational species would have negotiated terms, tried to save what they could from total defeat. But the humans didn't surrender. They did something that still haunts Coalition nightmares. Even facing complete annihilation, they kept fighting. Not just fighting, they launched a counterattack. Krextal's mandibles clicked with bitter admiration. A human commander named Wu Jin, captain of a crippled battlecruiser that should have been scrapped months earlier, led a desperate assault directly into the heart of our formation. The veteran's voice grew stronger as he relived those terrifying moments. Wu Jin's ship, the Defiant Dawn, was held together with emergency welds and prayers. Half her weapons were offline, her engines were running at 30% power, and her hull was breached in 17 places. A flying wreck that any sensible commander would have abandoned. How could such a damaged vessel pose a threat? Because it wasn't just one ship. Wu Jin had convinced every remaining human captain to follow him in a final suicide charge. Cargo vessels loaded with explosives, mining ships converted into battering rams, even escape pods packed with volunteers and nuclear devices. They came at us like a wave of pure determination. Krextal's scarred face twisted with remembered terror. Our fleet opened fire with everything we had. Plasma cannons, particle beams, antimatter torpedoes, enough concentrated firepower to sterilize a continent. We watched human ships explode in brilliant flashes, saw their formations torn apart by our superior weapons, but they kept coming. The journalist's recording device trembled in his grasp as he tried to capture every word. Wu Jin's Defiant Dawn somehow made it through our defensive fire. His ship was burning, trailing atmosphere and debris, but those insane humans managed to ram straight into our command dreadnought, Supremacy of Worlds. The impact should have destroyed both vessels instantly. Should have. Instead, Wu Jin and his surviving crew teleported aboard our flagship during the collision. They fought their way through our corridors like demons, taking casualties that would have broken any other species. When we finally cornered them in the main command center, only 12 humans were left alive out of 300. Krextal's voice dropped to barely audible levels. That's when Wu Jin did something that changed the course of galactic history. He looked directly at Admiral Kethamore, our supreme commander, and calmly informed him that he'd activated something called a dead man's switch. What was that? A signal transmitter linked to his vital signs. If Wu Jin died, every captured human ship in our fleet would simultaneously overload their reactor cores. We had been using dozens of their vessels as prizes of war, studying their technology, trying to understand their weapons. All of them were now bombs waiting to explode. The veteran's claws scraped deep grooves in the metal table as his grip tightened. Admiral Cathmore demanded to know if he was bluffing. Wu Jin just smiled, that terrifying human smile that showed his teeth, and said, "Try me." Surely he wouldn't actually. That's what made it so terrifying. Humans had already proven they would keep their word, even if it meant mutual destruction. Every promise they'd made during the war, every threat they'd issued had come true. When a human said they would die fighting, they meant it literally. Krextal's voice cracked with emotion. As I stared into Wu Jin's eyes through the command center's security feed, I saw something that chilled my blood to absolute zero. He wasn't afraid of dying. He wasn't even desperate. He was disappointed. Disappointed that he hadn't killed more of us, that the war might end before he could hurt the Coalition even more. The cantina remained frozen in horrified silence. That's when our admirals finally understood. To defeat humanity completely, we would have to become like them, willing to sacrifice everything, everyone, every principle we held dear just for victory. We would have to transform ourselves into the very monsters we claimed to be fighting against. And that scared you more than any weapon, more than anything in the universe, because we realized that if we won that way, we wouldn't be the Coalition anymore. We would be something else, something twisted and broken that could never, again, claim to be civilized. Krextal slowly finished his drink and stood up, his massive frame casting long shadows across the cantina floor. The peace treaty was signed 3 days later, not because we couldn't win, but because the cost of victory would have destroyed us more completely than any defeat. The humans kept their word. They honored the treaty, rebuilt their worlds, even helped us repair some of the damage. And now we don't conquer anymore. Every species in the former Coalition had the same nightmare after the war, that somewhere in the vast galaxy there might be another race like humanity, another species that refuses to lose, that turns everything into a weapon, that would rather die than kneel. The old warrior began walking toward the cantina's exit, his footsteps echoing in the unusual quiet. You want to know why the galaxy is more peaceful now? Because we learned the most important lesson in the universe. The greatest enemy isn't the one with the biggest guns or the largest fleet. It's the one that simply refuses to be defeated, no matter what the cost. The journalist watched as Krextal disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind only the echo of his words and the terrible truth they contained. The end.